You know, only ExxonMobil can make $11 billion on sales of $117 billion and be considered a disappointment. Wall Street expected more. Some in Congress can't take any more. Profits like that, they say, are beyond the pale, so they want to tax the whole pale. A windfall profits tax that Hillary Clinton says would go a long way toward helping vital services in this country. Take a listen to what she told Bill O'Reilly last night.
I do want a gas tax holiday, but to pay for it by putting a windfall profits tax on the oil companies.
Now, what does that mean, though?
Well,
what does that mean?
Now, look, what it means is that the oil companies have made out like bandits.
Right.
You know that.
Record
we
profits.
all know that,
Yeah.
right? And there is no basis for them to have these huge profits. They're not inventing anything new.
So what do you do? Take 20% of their profits away from them?
You set a baseline, and above that baseline, you begin to tax their profits.
Yusef Raab agrees with this. He says a tax on oil companies' profits would help us all out. Chris Nelder, on the other hand, says that it would only make us more dependent on oil. He is the co-author of Profit from the Peak. So, Yusef, I mean, you're telling the oil companies who in the last few years have been making a lot of money, leaving out the times when they weren't making a lot of money, we're going to put a cap on your money. What does that say to other companies that make a lot of money, or as a percentage of profits or percentage of revenues, make a lot more money?
Well, what this proposal does is seek to alleviate some of the immediate and severe price increases that American families are seeing from outrageous gas prices that are driving outrageous profits. It's time that I think the oil companies can afford to give a little bit to those consumers who are pumping their product into their tanks. What's more important, though, is Hillary Clinton's support for rolling back tax breaks on oil companies and investing that in alternative energies.
Well, Yusef, I see your point about getting rid of subsidies. I see your point about getting rid of subsidies and tax breaks for an industry that's making a lot of money.
Sure.
But I think it is a slippery slope, my friend, for you to start judging what is enough money versus too much money, because as soon as you start doing that, you're going to go willy-nilly to other companies or industries that make a lot of money, and you're going to be the arbiter. I don't know if I want that.
Well, I'm not going to be the arbiter. The American people and their elected officials
No. The
are going to be the
American people
arbiters,
aren't
and
signing up for
decide.
tax people's profits. What is this, Russia?
The American people want relief from outrageous gas prices. And by the way, we were just talking about the food crisis around the world. A lot of that is driven by fuel prices that increase the transportation that get passed on to the consumer.
All right, so you want to see this. Chris, you're worried about this. Explain.
Well, I feel that it's most important to maintain oil production as much as we can going forward, because thanks to peak oil, we are looking at the second half of the age of oil now, where oil becomes much more expensive and much more difficult to produce. So if we disincentivize the oil companies by taxing their profits, which they're desperately going to need in order to invest in future production, then I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors.
But Chris, does Yusef have a crucial point here? They're not doing enough with the profits they have. In other words, if the argument is, all right, be incentivized with all the money you're making to do something with that and pour it back into finding more oil, and they're not doing that to the degree you think they could or would or should, given all the money they're making, that they are partly to blame.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say they're to blame. They're more the lucky beneficiary of the fact that globally traded commodity like
I don't want to get into how they made the money, just that in order to look for alternatives, maybe they could and should use more of their own profits to do just that.
I agree with that, and I also agree with the concept that we should probably try to level the playing field for renewable energy a little better by removing some of the subsidies that already exist for the oil and gas industry.
All right. Well, we're all in agreement on that.
$500 billion a year.
Okay.
Well,
Yusef, just explore this for me, because here's what I don't understand.
Sure.
This for Yusef. I'm wondering now whether, when the oil companies are making money hand over fist, I'm old enough to remember when they weren't, when there was $10 oil and the wildcats going out of business, distributors merging. It is, after all, how Exxon and Mobil got together. And no one was crying for them, nor should they have, I guess, but they were laying a lot of people off. So would you return money you take off their profits when they inevitably lose money?
I don't know about returning that money, but these windfall profits tax provisions are just that, windfall profits taxes. If the profits are not extreme and obscene, the tax doesn't exist. But by the way, the era of cheap
What's
the
obscene?
era of cheap oil, let's say, as some others have, and I'm not going to put a benchmark on it, let's say taxes when oil prices are over $80 a barrel. Look, here's the bottom line. The era of cheap oil, $10, $20, $50, is over.
You don't know
OPEC,
stop it. You have no idea where oil's going.
An OPEC board member today said it's going to go up to $200 a barrel. That's a high estimate.
You're way off topic.
But the era of cheap oil is actually over. Actually, Chris is, if he's saying that peak oil and we're going to start running out of oil, obviously with China and India and everyone else increasing demand,
right now, Yusuf, are running out of
there.
All right, I'm telling you this, Yusuf, because you don't answer me. I'm going to cut your mic. Here's what I'm asking you. Take a look at the money they are making, right? You are saying now that anything over $80 is apparently an excess, a non-right amount.
And again, Neil, that was a for example.
I don't care what Brainiac came up with that asinine figure. Now that it's around 110, then the oil companies somehow are responsible for that $30 pad and must give back that $30 pad. I don't know where you're coming from.
Not that $30 pad. It's when their profits are above a certain benchmark, as Senator Clinton just told Bill O'Reilly, there will be a certain extra tax put on that.
It is arbitrary. Someone is saying, we think $80 is the pad. We think 110 is the gap between what is justified and what is outrageous. Again, Chris, this is for you. When we start, let's say Apple, we don't like them selling, what, $500 or $600 iPhones. We're going to demand they sell $200 iPhones? Is that next? What do you think, Chris?
Oh, sorry. I don't believe that we should be looking at the oil companies in terms of their profits on a globally traded commodity. The oil companies are not setting the price of oil. It's the international speculative trade that is setting the price of oil. So the profits that big oil might make at this point, I don't think are necessarily off the table as in terms of being available to invest in the technologies of energy of the future. I think instead of taxing income and profits, we ought to be looking at ways to incentivize the fuels of the future.
Well, we ought to be exploring, we ought to be conserving, we ought to be looking at alternatives, we ought to be doing all of the above.
Absolutely.
But then going back to the people making the money.
And windfall profits taxes on oil companies should be directed towards supporting that alternative energy research. Look, the oil companies spent less than 0.5% on that research. We have to move past oil. If the oil companies are going to help us out in helping remedy the problems that they've caused with their profits, then maybe the government needs to step in and make them spend that money.
My
and actually,
goodness.
an earlier
Yusuf,
proposal of Senator Clinton.
I'd love to get you here and talk longer one time and just remind you of a couple of things, but I wish I had more time for that. Yusuf, I want to thank you. Chris, I want to thank you. And before any of you at home start saying, oh, Neil owns a lot of oil stocks, I own not a one. Not a one. Oy. Well,